Go to the next slide. This is a bar graph. This is assortative mating of not just spouses but also best friends. If you look at physical characteristics, people are picking each other on similarity. But the interesting point is that they pick each other more on the more heritable of those characteristics. If you look at your wrist is very heritable. It's about 80% heritable. If you look at your waist, it too is heritable, but it's only about 40% heritable. If you look at your thigh, it also is heritable, but it's about 60% heritable. So some of these characteristics are much more modifiable by what exercise regimes you are on, what food you eat, and so on, whereas other things like the length of your earlobe, the distance between your eyes, the width of your nose, these are much more heritable. And it turns out that spouses and best friends are picking each other more on those most heritable characteristics. Now, I don't think that it's true, that I don't know what the mechanisms are, that people sit there and look at each other's earlobes and say, yes, this is the mate for me. It's all being done unconsciously somehow. But it shows, at least on physical characteristics, it's heritability, not culture. And notice that this is a differential prediction. This is a prediction, this pattern, from genetic theory. Culture theory predicts the opposite. Culture theory predicts something quite different. It says people will grow to be like each other as a result of social activities. So if you're couch potatoes, then you're going to develop a certain different type of body than if you're bicyclists. And so it's the activities that make people the same. So it would predict that those physical characteristics which are most modifiable should be the ones that spouses assort most on. And they're not. So in science, when you can pit two alternative theories against each other and make diametrically opposite predictions, and one is supported and the other is falsified, then that really is a strong piece of evidence. But you might say, well, maybe that's just something about these physical characteristics. So let's go to the next slide. This is personality. This is personality. Some traits are more heritable than others. If you have a dimension of anxiety, sport parachuting, do you enjoy sport parachuting, would be a good item to measure how anxious you are. It has a very, very high heritability. If I asked you, would being in debt worry you? That also is a good indicator of anxiety disposition, but it has a much lower heritability. So some items of personality are more heritable than others. If you look at the bar chart again, we find that spouses and best friends are most similar on the more heritable items. Go to the next one. Cognitive traits. Even IQ tests, if you have 60 or 80 items on an IQ test, some of those items are more genetically penetrated than others. Once again, spouses pick each other on the basis of the more genetically influenced items. Next one. Social attitudes. It's surprising to some people that even social attitudes have a heritable component. It's genes that make you incline you towards wanting to hug criminals or castrate them. Maybe it's a punitiveness, I don't know, but makes you choose Rottweilers rather than some other kind of dog. So a disposition that inclines you to a number of things. People's social attitudes can be scaled in how heritable they are. Again, on the more heritable. Next item. Blood tests. Well, this isn't a very clear slide, but if you look at the two bars in the middle, they're friends, and bottom line is that best friends and spouses are genetically more similar even when you take blood tests. This study was done about 10 or 15, 20 years ago, and it has a sort of archaic ring to it now, because of course if we were doing the study today, we'd be taking DNA markers and not blood loci. But the physical evidence is that people are actually at the DNA level more similar to each other. Next item. Okay, so fast forward to today. This is a top journal that, if we go to the next one, that Trudy Bonds and I just published a paper in July of last year on twins. Who do twins marry? If you remember, identical twins are twins that have 100% of their genes in common. Fraternal twins only have 50% of their genes in common. So, do the identical twins choose more similar spouses to each other than the fraternal twins, also choosing spouses who may be similar but less similar than the identical twins? The answer is yes. Do the identical twins choose more similar friends to each other than the fraternal twins? Again, the answer is yes. And everybody in the field of behavior genetics knows that identical twins choose more similar motor cars to drive, or houses to live in, or places to go on vacation, clothing styles, and so on. They're very identical in their preferences. But to find that identical twins are also more similar in their preferences for mates and spouses and best friends is extremely good evidence for the genetic similarity argument. It shows that these dispositions are heritable. And because of Trudy and I did an analysis, we go to the next one. This is just a pie chart, basically separating out genetic variants from different kinds of cultural variants. And what we found in this particular study was that 18% of the variance is genetic for the choice of spouse, and 41% of the variance is genetic for choice of best friends. Now you might say, well, 18% isn't all that great, but in fact 18% of the variance is a big effect. And more than a whisper coming out of the genes. And of course it's much bigger for choosing a spouse, choosing a best friend, and I think the reason is 41% there, almost 50% heritable, your preference for friends. I think the reason is that when you choose a spouse, you're much more constrained. I mean, first of all, the spouse has to want to marry you back and so on. There are just many more constraints on your choices. So it reduces the genetic percentage. But anyway, this is evidence of genetic similarity theory. I think that's nailed down almost. And don't forget that who you marry, when you pick a spouse or pick a best friend, this is not kin. This is totally different from kin selection theory, the old Hamiltonian model. You're not marrying relatives. So we're really expanding this who are you going to be altruistic towards argument. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, this is a journal called Nations and Nationals. It's a top journal. It's published by the London School of Economics, and people who publish in there are trying to explain why there's nationalism in different places, why it increases or decreases at different points in time, and so on and so forth. And I think all political scientists have been stunned by the incredible outbreak of ethnic nationalism in Eastern Europe. When the USSR fell, it split all the way along ethnic lines, and old hatreds or new ones just emerged, and antagonisms and conflict, and nobody ever thought this would happen in Europe again. Somehow modernism, capitalism, whatever, had gone beyond that, but we could see that it just fell all back. Why? And so all these different theories are put forward to explain it. Go to the next one. I was very pleased to be able to say that in the last lead issue of the last issue had a paper by me explaining or extrapolating the genetic similarity theory argument to try to explain nationalism. that really fellow ethnics are just members of one big family, which is the traditional view of what an ethnic state is. And therefore, families are meant to be groups of genes. And one of the things I was able to do was to try to explain certain anomalies. For example, in the Middle East, why are there suicide bombers? Why is there so much incredible irrationality and hostility and hatred? Why does Arab movements go from nationalism to fundamentalism, or from fundamentalism up to nationalism, back and forth? And one explanation is that these are just different attempts by gene pools to exert themselves. And if one method doesn't work, then you run into a roadblock. We'll try a different method. So cultures are really just attempts by the underlying genes to extract their way and keep themselves being replicated. In any case, we go to the next slide. This is a book by Frank Salter, who's a political ethologist at the Max Planck Institute in Munich, although right now he's a visiting professor of political science at Birkbeck College in London. And he has taken this genetic similarity theory viewpoint and extrapolated it to nations and nationalism even more. And if we go to the next slide, this is a complicated slide, and maybe I shouldn't even be putting it up, but the main point I want to get across, and this comes out of Frank Salter's work, is he's taken very well accepted by everybody published data, looking at DNA around the world. You know, I have all these theories of who's genetically distant or similar to who and so on, where you can invert that data to actually look at how similar within a nation or within a population are people. And the bottom line goes something like this. If the world was made up only of English people, then one random English person is 0% related to any other English person. There's just no relationship there. It's all mixed up. But if the world suddenly is divided up into English people and Germans, then English people are to themselves 1/32nd of a cousin. Any random English person meeting another random English person is 1/32nd of a cousin compared to the Germans. As are the Germans 1/32nd of a cousin each compared to the English. Well, this now begins to give you a sense, even at that level, of one nation, Germans and English people going to war against each other, because you magnify 1/32nd of a cousin by hundreds, tens of thousands, millions of people, my family against your family, then you can get these hatreds, even between groups that are so similar as the English and the Germans. And the rest of the chart takes this even further. And it says, if an English person, if the world was made up of English people and Middle Easterners, then English people are 3/8 of a cousin, randomly, to each other, compared to a Middle Eastern person. Compared to Indians, they're half cousins. Compared to the Chinese, they're half siblings. So if you're in China and you meet another English person, another white person, you are like meeting a half sibling compared to the Chinese around you. And if you go to Africa and you meet another white person, then you're full siblings. And of course the blacks in America recognize this. They call each other bro and so on. They're brothers. And in fact, genetically, it's true. And these data may need increasing or decreasing the actual magnitudes, but they're really built on enormous amounts of DNA information. So this, more than anything, proves that there is a genetic basis. It's rational and understandable why there is irrational behavior in Serbia or in the Middle East or virtually in Northern Ireland or almost anywhere else you go. People are acting in the service of their genes.